My name's Harriet Barnfather, I should start there. I am a therapist of sorts, working in the NHS, but Maureen has ever so kindly sort of hunted me out and found me to sort of do a presentation on anxiety as it sort of affects a lot of people who struggle with cancer as well. So I guess the background of the charity being set up is that there seems to be a big shortfall of services in the area, specifically North Tyneside, in terms of, you know, the complex need of going through cancer and struggling with common mental health problems. There doesn't seem to be much specific out there for people. My advice, which is not subscribed by any organisation, NHS or otherwise, would simply be to almost limit the kind of contact you have with information. So social media seems to be inundated with posts, memes, jokes and false news, false facts about coronavirus. I would try and stick to, and I'm trying myself to just manage it by, you know, one piece of news about corona a day is quite sufficient, because you can just end up feeding that cycle for yourself of, what if I get it? Am I developing symptoms now? What if I am sick and make my, you know, sick parent or what have you even more unwell? But it doesn't benefit us to think that way, which I'll certainly be going through in the main presentation. But I guess in these uncertain times, I would be suggesting people to do what's reasonable. Read reputable sources if we're talking about coronavirus. Make sure it's, you know, a substantiated source, and try and not read too much about it. Only seek advice if you absolutely feel you have to, through sort of 111, NHS services and all the rest of it. And keeping well, I think a lot of the techniques that I've mentioned in terms of uncertainty around cancer and, you know, that sort of diagnoses, there can be a lot of certainty or certainly control that can be had from the things that I'll discuss today. So that would be my advice. Have a try and see if that helps, even just a little bit. It's worth a go. Starting with relaxation sounds ridiculous, feels a bit alien at first, but so easy to implement, and you will see the positive effects of it. So great for panic attacks, generalised anxiety, stress management, pain management. We love relaxation. There's tons of apps now as well. NHS tends to subscribe more to Headspace. You can go so far in Headspace, I'm told, and then they'll make you pay a certain amount for certain bits. There's another app called Calm, but my advice would just be look on your app store and see what's like rated the highest. Give them a go. There's tons out there. Scads of stuff on YouTube. Quite frequently when I do these wellbeing presentations, we have links to breathing techniques, grounding technique, and a muscle relaxation technique, which is fab for sleep if you've got some sleep problems. Oh, yeah. I can feel the anxiety in the wording of that. You can't protect your children from everything, I guess, but certainly if you focus on managing your anxiety for yourself, for you alone, that's going to help you and make you feel less concerned about passing it on to a son or daughter, or making them feel anxious because you're anxious. Yeah, it sounds like some relaxation would be great for you. A little bit of self-care, and perhaps some of the thought stuff that I mentioned, so that sort of self-compassion is going to be quite powerful. It's almost quite often our thoughts can trick us into, you know, but I'm hearing there's a lot of concern for others and how other people are affected by things, rather than the concern for yourself and your well-being. It starts with you. We quite often talk about anxiety in terms of, you know, you can't really pour from an empty cup. You have to help yourself before you help others. Very much like you would on a plane, you know, put your oxygen mask on before you put your kids on, because if you're passed out on the plane, yeah, you can't help your little tot, can you? So I think my advice to you would be start with you. Once you manage to get a little bit of control there, you feel a bit empowered, then that worry of, well, what if, you know, little Tommy or Judith or what have you is affected by that, it's going to slowly fade away. It sounds like you've given me a worry and you're looking for some reassurance that actually, you know, well, they'll be fine, they're quite resilient. I would say build your resilience first. So anxiety as a definition is often an emotion characterised by feelings of tension, worried thoughts and physiological changes. So when we think about anxiety, there's lots and lots of words that can be conjured up when we think of that. So the idea of worry, the feeling of anxiety that it brings about, the uncertainty about the future, fear, health concerns as well, especially in light of, you know, recent sort of events with coronavirus. The physiological symptoms, so when I say physiological, I mean in the body, the physical stuff that affects us, are absolutely huge, they're vast. So this slide, there's a whole raft of symptoms here. So heart palpitations, feeling a bit faint, feeling numb at points. Some people can even sort of say that they get sort of tinglings in the extremity, so pins and needles in your hands and your feet. I'm getting nods from the corner here. Chest pain or tightness in the chest, tiredness, jelly legs, bladder weakness, nausea, blurred vision. There's some really funny ones on here as well. I'm trying to find one. Yeah, like a choking sensation, so like your throat's closing up. Yeah, the symptoms are vast, and that's probably not an exhaustive list. So really useful to have an awareness of the effect that anxiety can have on the body, because it's really powerful, and not a lot of people make that connection until they're struck with anxiety. It's relevant for me to mention those bits and pieces because I think that really relates to cancer and how quite often cancer can come with a lot of physical symptoms as well. So I've made a slide that sort of relates to, you know, the common sort of denominators between anxiety experience and cancer experience. So loss of appetite, yeah, definitely. Whether you're going through treatment or you just have the diagnosis, it might be that that's something you're struggling with. Headaches, tension headaches are really common with anxiety, but also that's not uncommon with a cancer diagnosis. Stomach pain, memory loss, they talk about cancer fog actually as well, so it's sort of linked in with what you mentioned there. Nausea, obviously, sleeping difficulties, tiredness, incontinence, sexual dysfunction, that can happen if you're just feeling anxious as well, but yeah, can affect cancer patients. And poor concentration, so it might be that, you know, the cancer itself or the treatment of cancer is causing these physical symptoms, so it might not be you know, the potential, but it could be that we're looking at anxiety. There's a whole raft of symptoms, and there's some research to almost substantiate that as well. It can be that when your body's faced with a stressful or frightening or even life-threatening situation, that triggers off an internal response called the fight, flight, freeze response. So we're harking back to sort of evolutionary psychology here, and when we're sort of like almost like cavemen, back so far as that, this response is really, really necessary. For me, you know, it's going to get me out of the way of moving traffic, that really, really quick internal response to get my muscles in gear, get my heart pumping, the blood around my body. It's going to be really good to get me out of the way of the oncoming car. I do have a link to a video. We have a link to a video. It's a great YouTube video, and I think it explains the fight, flight, freeze response far better than I could. It's a really good video which I'd recommend a watch, just on YouTube, so click through and have a look at that, because that will explain all of the physiological changes that happen when this response is ignited. So we move on to sort of where anxiety comes from, and a lot of the time, you know, I guess the treatment that I work within isn't so much about finding out where it came from as such as sort of treating it in the main. But it can be helpful for some people to have an awareness of where this might have, you know, been born from. And so there's a few sort of schools of thought that think there might be a genetic predisposition. So it could be that, you know, genetically you're just a little bit more vulnerable. And it, you know, chronic difficulties with anxiety can be sort of passed on. There's talk that, you know, in terms of genes and how that works, it might be an imbalance of chemicals in the brain, sort of happy hormones like serotonin or adrenaline, things like that, which often involved in sort of controlling your emotions, can be a little bit heightened or lack, dependent on what the hormone is there. So research that I've found estimates sort of 5 times more likely to develop generalized anxiety disorder if you've got a close relative with a condition as well. So whether that's a genetic sort of pass on or more learnt behaviours, doesn't really matter. It's sort of anxiety likes to spread. Any significant life event can trigger an anxiety reaction. So if you've been diagnosed with cancer recently, maybe 5 years ago, 10 years ago, or your mum, your dad, your daughter, your auntie's got cancer, it's a scary time, and it has a huge impact on sort of how we feel about things. That diagnosis can really sort of shock the family. So it's just about, you know, that condition can also sort of cause that. That's a big life event that's happening there. It might be even a loss reaction. So again, with a significant life change, we almost come into the realm of sort of loss and adjustment. So any huge adjustment to something that can often sort of make people struggle with anxiety. And I guess with that, with having cancer, comes the loss of a job role or a caring role, or sense of identity, esteem, you know, loss of potential, you know, physical attributes. If you're losing your hair, or you've lost a breast, or, you know, whatever the sort of thing is, it's loss can also be a big trigger for typically mood difficulties, but anxiety is not out of the realm of possibility there either. So it might be that an awareness allows you to give yourself a little bit of a break in terms of, you know, I'm not going absolutely mental. There's a reason why this is happening to me or for me. In the context of cancer, again, not a lot of focus tends to be on cancer and how it affects our mental health. A lot of the focus, the resources tend to be on the physical aspects of cancer care. So the effect that cancer has on our emotional and mental health receives a lot less attention, but actually there's lots and lots of evidence to suggest that living with the stress of cancer, the emotional toll, is a persistent sort of difficulty for people and causes a lot of distress, and that can almost be more harrowing for people than, you know, the prognosis or the treatment or, you know, the future. And so about half of people with cancer identify that they have, you know, the emotional effects are more difficult to cope with than the physical effects. So it's obviously quite prevalent for people. It's normal to feel however you're feeling. So you're totally not alone in this. And I think that very much feeds into that thing that I just said before of it's really helpful in a group setting, and unfortunately, you know, having to do this sort of remotely, but really helpful to know that there is support out there. You know, there have been people that have gone through this before and survived and thrived, and it's just about how we manage that, which I'll certainly come on to. So I also wanted to sort of talk about that diagnosis itself is a difficult thing to cope with, whether it's yours or a loved one's. Totally normal to feel anxious, frightened, panicky, and how you cope with those things depends on a number of factors. So it might be the kind of person you are, how advanced the cancer is, what type of treatment you have in place, how much support you have around you is a huge factor as well. And it might be that you're concerned about what's going to happen to you. It could be concerns of, you know, the side effects of treatment, or whether treatment will work might be on your mind as well. You may feel that you're coping really well and just sort of take it in your stride and get on with it and deal with anxiety as it arises. It might actually be the sort of loved ones around you that are more struggling with anxiety. So it's the peaks and troughs really. It affects everyone very differently. The more extreme feelings, the more extreme sort of experience of anxiety could be panic attacks, which are a little bit more elevated than just sort of worrying, but again, it could feel just as bad. And these can be quite frightening when we struggle with a panic attack. It can feel like a heart attack for some people. Really great sort of slide here that talks about the cancer journey. So whether you're at sort of the detection stage, diagnosis, treatment, follow-up care, or whether it's, you know, the other end of things where it's survivorship or end of life care, palliative care. A lot of the research is sort of focused on the beginning stages of the cancer journey, so tending to be around detection, diagnosis. So I found a lump, or I've got a symptom. I'm going for tests. What does this mean? So obviously really heightened anxiety response at that time. But I think what doesn't get a lot of focus is the sort of stages thereafter. So it could be that, you know, you've managed through treatment absolutely swimmingly and it's only just hitting you now. And there is such a thing called delayed psychological response. So quite often when people are sort of bereft or have a loss reaction, that, you know, at the time they can manage it really well. Sort of you pop your practical head on, don't you? But it's only after that you actually realise that, you know, this has actually really affected me and I don't know why I'm feeling this way 6 months, a year, you know, some time after. So it's just useful to have that awareness as well. This is the part where we talk about actual support for anxiety and what that looks like. So I have a bit of a slide here that talks about sort of the areas or arenas of support that you can have for anxiety. So understanding, whether that's you understanding your cancer diagnosis, a loved one's cancer diagnosis, or understanding your anxiety, or having others understand your anxiety, really powerful. And so it's going to be really great. And again, that's that social network thing that very much ties into that third point that I've got there around, you know, who you've got around you, and that support that you can access is going to be really helpful. Well-being, that's something that I'm going to talk about in a few slides time. So how do we focus on positive mental health? And it's very sort of basic skills of sort of cognitive behavioural therapy that I'll talk through. They sound basic, but they're super powerful, so I advise anyone to really give it a go. The next point was about social support, so finding, you know, getting in touch with friends, family, loved ones, you know, expressing how you feel, or perhaps letting people know what's helpful for you, because it might not be helpful if someone's sort of pandering to you or trying to do things for you. It might be actually, I feel more supported when I'm just left to get on with things, tie my own shoelaces and such. So don't be afraid to let people know how you want to be sort of approached or interacted with. That might be helpful for people. And obviously sort of community events, very much organised by Live Well with Cancer. Hopefully there's plans being made around how to deliver such things given recent sort of events. But yeah, so engaging with the community and other like-minded people is, again, that support's just there in heaps, and it's going to be helpful. And then therapeutic tools, so where well-being focuses more on how to keep well physically and mentally. The tools are a little bit more that CBT focus, so the things that can really explore how to manage anxiety, how to manage worries, and how to be a little bit more present in our thinking. So that's going to be a bit more therapeutic than just the well-being stuff, which we probably already know and know what to do, but it might be that we're just not doing it. There's a little bit of a leaf of the petal that talks about connection. So social withdrawal seems to be quite rife with anxiety, but in turn that has a negative impact on our mood. Quite frequently it's about, you know, making sure that you foster those close relationships with friends, with family, with the community. Again, that support network, we know how intrinsic that is to our well-being, and the support that we can access when we're struggling with mental health, not only mental health and physical health. So definitely connect with the people around you. There's one on here that says take notice. I'm definitely going to come back to this point, but spending time appreciating the present moment. So this is sort of harking to being a bit more mindful about, you know, what's going on now for us, rather than what has happened or what could happen. Far more beneficial for our mental health to be in the present. Getting active is the last petal that it comes to. So we think about activity in terms of doing something as sort of low level as like a crossword or a Sudoku, something like that. You know, it doesn't have to be, you know, running a marathon or what have you. Although sort of GPs tend to, you know, talk about, well, if you're feeling down or feeling anxious, join the gym, which is really helpful, because it's as good as antidepressants. So that's probably why they sort of peddle exercise. But if you can't manage exercise currently, then just do little. Potter around the house, or think about, you know, planting some plants in the garden, or I don't know, walk on the beach. Something that's going to be less sort of strenuous that you could manage. Try not to push yourself too hard. You're probably going to know your limits there. There is a petal, that first one there talks about learning, so again, dependent on how well you are, how you're feeling at the moment, but it does often benefit us to sort of throw ourselves into a bit of a project, so something that we're going to get something from, learning, or a skill that we can develop. So that's always really, really helpful. So reading a book, cooking a new recipe. I've mentioned here keep up with world news, but I wouldn't be advising that at the moment. Sign up for a class. Yeah, so think about those things if and when that's sort of feasible for you. The last petal is about giving back. So again, it's going to be very dependent on how you're feeling at the given time, but sort of the idea of sort of giving back to your community, or people that have been kind to you. So eating well, watching your substance use, so drinking, smoking, those negative coping strategies tend to just be a bit of a cycle in terms of that's not going to be actually all that helpful for us, can keep the problem going. Exercise, again, that's going to be dependent on what you can manage, but just do little bits. Reducing unnecessary stress. So this is a really, really powerful one that I often talk about. So if there's a stress that you can avoid and you're already stressed, then avoid the unnecessary stress. You know, if it's that, oh, can you just babysit? No. Or can you pick up an extra shift? No. Feel free to say no. No is a good word sometimes. Relaxation, and that's something that I'm going to come on to as well. Relaxation is really, really helpful for our well-being and great for anxiety management, so I'll definitely talk us through some of those techniques as well. In terms of self-soothing activities as well, so just the basic stuff that we covered on before, so trying to do the little things that might create a little bit of calm from the storm, as it were. So for some people it could be having a nice hot soak in the tub. For other people it might be going for a run, or listening to music, or Lego. Yeah. I'm told that's quite mindful. Yeah. Quite a helpful technique when it comes to these critical thoughts and negative self-talk is, if you wouldn't say it to another person, then you shouldn't be saying it to yourself. If you wouldn't say it to a child, then you shouldn't be saying it to yourself. So it's just measuring by that sort of mantra is going to be really, really helpful. Because if you're saying to yourself, I'm useless, I'm worthless, this is, you know, it's not a good way to think or talk to yourself. But equally, if there's no way you would say that to a small child or your best friend, banter excluded, then you shouldn't be saying it to yourself, is a good rule to follow. So yeah, so I've got an example of a critical thought here. So I'm useless, I haven't cleaned the house today. So in the context of cancer, it might be, think about the compassionate response. So if you said that to a friend, or a friend had said that to themselves. So if I said, I'm useless, haven't cleaned the house today, it was on my to-do list, I haven't gotten around to it, I feel crap about it. But actually a friend would probably say to me, actually it's really understandable, Harriet, that you haven't done, you know, what you'd set out to do. Perhaps you've planned too much in, or you didn't expect to experience pain or nausea, side effects from medications or whatever. You can try again tomorrow, or just do a little bit. You might feel better if you do 5 minutes rather than 50. So again, just trying to have that compassionate stance is going to be really, really helpful for your mood and anxiety to an extent as well. Or gratitude, you know, telling yourself, what do I feel grateful for? You know, again, don't necessarily have to write it down if it feels a bit woolly, but just have a think about, you know, the things that you've got rather than the things that you haven't. Setting small goals is obviously really, really helpful. You know, the idea of, if I intend to clean the entire house from top to bottom, that's too much for me to do, let alone me with cancer and anxiety. And so just again, being sensible with those goals. Don't ask too much of yourself. Then we move on to mindfulness. So the techniques that I've mentioned so far are quite mindful, but to be mindful means to be more present focused, so to pay more attention to the present moment. So this technique is really, really fantastic if you're finding that your worries are sort of sending you off into, you know, years and years to come from now. Or if it's, you know, the sort of focus on the cancer or pain symptoms or whatever it is that's sort of ailing you at that moment, have a think about being a bit more mindful, because if our mind is running off to the future or even perhaps back to the past, then maybe doing a little bit of breathing or this mindfulness exercise, it's just far more beneficial. So this is like a grounding exercise, often used in trauma, so fantastic if you've got anxiety that's to such a distressing level as well. Around 5 things that you can see around you, 4 things that you can feel, 3 things that you can hear, 2 things that you can perhaps smell, and 1 thing that you can taste. So again, the numbers don't really matter so much, we're just trying to engage the senses. So it's going to force you to be a little bit more present focused. So managing thoughts and worries in a better way is tending to be somewhere that we would move on to in sort of later therapy. So once we've got the relaxation and mindfulness in our arsenal, then we would delve into the more cognitive stuff. So really thinking about how you relate to yourself, what you think, and all those bits and pieces. Trying not to get entangled in thoughts or future-based worries, because it's often not helpful for us. As a bit of an aside here, seeking out some more therapy, more support. So obviously, I think Maureen's got some more well-being type groups to come in the remainder of the year. But if it's about more psychological support, then that might be from services in the area. So again, Ben, if you could link this in. I've popped down the number for local services. Now, the service is going to depend on your GP. Certainly it does for my service. It might be based on your address. Your GP can refer you, but you can also refer yourself to a lot of these services. So we have talk-in therapy services in North Tyneside, Northumberland and Newcastle, numbers there. But it's a national scheme. So wherever you're living, you can access your local IAPT service. And IAPT just stands for Improving Access to Psychological Therapies. A lot of the stuff that I've talked about today has been in the therapy that I'm trained in, which is more cognitive behavioural therapy, so the focus on your thoughts and your behaviours, what you do. But it may be for your problem that counselling might be a better fit. So thinking about real exploration with another person about, you know, your diagnoses, or how you relate to yourself or other people. It might be that counselling is a better fit for you if it's a specific look at a loss or an adjustment or exploration, whereas CBT tends to be the more practical stuff. So for anxiety, we would always be advising CBT, but in the context of cancer, it might be the anxiety is a result of, you know, the huge change and loss, which would say counselling. So very much depends on what you're looking for, what you want to get from therapy as to which therapy is going to be most beneficial.